Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another day in Crash Course in Music History, focusing on the Baroque era. We're going to move into the later 17th century now and some other things that we didn't get to discuss the other day. And then I believe we just have one or two more lessons on Baroque and we're on to the classical era, so that's exciting. Remember, you've got a quiz on Friday. Watch for the bolded terms. Keep track of composers and songs you like because you will need one song from the Baroque era to put on your program for your final at the end of the semester. All right, let's get going into the mid and late 17th century. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on in France at this time, because that's important. You all might recognize the building on the right. All those pictures are of the same facility. That's the Palace of Versailles in France, and this was built by King Louis the 14th. In the 1600s. He was the ruler through the second half of the 17th century in France, and he was a music lover. He not only built Versailles, but he also rebuilt the Louvre. And he, like I say, loved music, paid his musicians well, had a staff of up to 200 musicians. And this good funding of music allowed for the development of some great woodwind players and the development of woodwind instruments, and also led to the development of orchestras. The modern orchestra with multiple string players on each part and a mix of string instruments was really starting to take shape in France at this time, actually more with King Louis's predecessor, but then he really kept it going. And so the word orchestra actually first officially appears during this time. You see on there I've got a term, the Great Stable. This was a reference to the collection of musicians that Louis paid to play for a bunch of different outdoor events. And it doesn't sound very flattering, but they were actually very well paid, sometimes exempt from taxes. This man really did a lot to promote music, not just in France, but in Europe, which kind of looked to France's influence. So we need to talk about music and composers from this era. Opera at this point, remember we talked about that the other day, was mostly in Italian, and the snobbish French weren't so down with that. And so, one of the leading composers and musicians of this era, and a musician well loved by King Louis, for the most part, till later on in his life, Jean-Baptiste Lully, who was originally from Florence, Italy, but came to Paris to study music and dance. And a ballet that he had written caught the attention of King Louis, and so he was hired to work for him. And eventually, with the blessing of the king, Lully developed a uniquely French style of opera. Tragédie en musique, or tragédie lyrique, was the later term for it, which mixed drama, dance, and music with lots of musical interludes. So it was different from Italian opera, which didn't have the dancing, didn't have the same musical kind of interludes in it. French opera also opens with something called an overture. This is a term I want you to know. If you're looking at the French, it's ouverture, but you can just know overture. This literally means opening. It's the introduction. It's at the beginning of the opera. And the purpose of this in French opera was this is where the king would walk in. And so there's there's these two tunes that are each played twice. And they're kind of very stately and formal, but you'll recognize that they're French because they have dotted rhythms. So long, short, long, short, long. Da 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 instead of da 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 da. That's the pattern you're looking for, is the da 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 da. And they often use what's called overdotting, which means to hold that long note even just a little bit longer. Da 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 da. So that's the pattern that you're going to hear. And then the second half has phrases that rush a little bit more towards the downbeats. This music is also tonal. Do you remember what that means from the other day? Remember, music prior to this was written with what? Modes. Right, church modes. Now we're using major and minor keys for sure. So what I'd like you to do is go to your playlist, and I want you to listen to the overture from Lully's opera Armide, which is... It's so French. It's a story about a lady, Armide, who traps this Christian knight that's on, and this is, so like soldier going off for the crusades for the church. She traps him with her magic, and she's gonna kill him, but then as she raises the dagger, she realizes, oh, I love him. And so she uses her magic instead to make him love her, and she takes him home. But then she hates the fact that he only loves her because she's cast a spell on him, so she tries to hate him again. She can't. She asks the goddess of hate to cause her to hate him, and instead the goddess is like, bummer, I'm going to condemn you to love him forever. And then while that happens, some of his friends help him escape and break free from her spell. And so the opera ends with Armide all upset and angry and hopeless. So, anyways, Lully, fun fact about Lully, he used to conduct with a staff. So think like he had a big stick, I'll use this hand, and he'd go, I'm trying to angle with the camera here, and he would go boom, 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 boom. That's how he would conduct instead of using a baton and kind of floating like this. And unfortunately, he accidentally stabbed his foot with his staff and got gangrene, and that's how he died. And that's not even the most ridiculous part of his life, which was kind of rocked with scandal there for a little while. But you can read about that somewhere else. So, anyways, listen to the overture, listen for those dotted rhythms, and picture Louis XIV coming in to hear this grand old opera. And then we'll go on from there. So take a listen. All right, let's hop over to Great Britain now and England, and let's talk a little bit about Henry Purcell, who was the leading English composer at this time. He lived from 1659 to 1695. You just got to swap the letters there, so he didn't live very long. You have to remember, this is important to know, that England is at this point a constitutional monarchy. So remember that you have the Magna Carta signed, and basically, unlike France, the monarchy isn't completely in charge. They have to share their power with Parliament, which is like our Congress. It's people elected. And so not one person has all the power to run the country. But by the same token, that also means that there's not as much money to fund music like the French had. Popular music for the English at this time included a style of music called the masque. So if you think of Phantom of the Opera and Masquerade, this doesn't have to do with masks covering your face, but it does have to do with social gatherings that involve dancing, singing, by both soloists and choirs. There's some staging, but again, it's not a play, it's not an opera. This is kind of done in a social context, so people aren't just sitting and watching. Purcell took what the English loved about masks and he put them into his operas. And a piece that I'd like you to listen to comes from his most famous, really his only opera, Dido and Aeneas, which he composed in 1689. It's a short little opera, and again, I'll give you a brief plot summary. It's about a queen who feels like she needs to marry someone to save her country, and she does love this guy, and he loves her, but then he's tricked by some sorceress into leaving with the whole intention of breaking the queen's heart so that then she'll die, and he comes back after being tricked, but she's like, no, you left me, how dare you try and leave, and he leaves and she dies from a broken heart. So, opera. But you need to listen to what's called Dido's Lament. It's the last aria that's sung in the opera. And it's the queen singing about how she's heartbroken and she hopes that when she dies that the mistakes that she's made won't cause anyone any pain or trouble. It's going to begin with the recitative, Thy Hand Belinda. Belinda's like her friend and maid. And so I want you to listen. It's a little harder to recognize that it's recitative. Remember, recitative is kind of like free rhythm spoken, but you'll hear the rolled chords in the accompaniment underneath. You're going to hear a really cool chromatic descending line, and then you're going to hear the aria when it starts, When I Am Laid in the Earth. And it's going to play your heartstrings like a fiddle. It's so good. Listen in the aria for the basso continuo, or the bass ostinato. Remember, that's a repeated bass line that repeats over and over again. So there's a few measures of this bass line, and then it happens again, and again, and again. You're going to hear this, and it's this cool chromatic descending line that's just so beautiful. And look, if you watch the YouTube version, look for the figured bass in the score. And then just enjoy the music for what it is, because this piece is beautiful. Just a real heartstring puller. All right, so take a listen and enjoy and then come back. All right, other items that we should mention from this time that are important to bring up, and we'll go quickly with this. This is our last slide. you've got at this time the development of string instruments and the real refinement of their design. This is the area, if you've ever heard of a Stradivarius violin or a Strad, this is the area when those were being developed. Italy was considered the leading manufacturer in, well, frankly, most instruments, specifically strings, and perhaps the most well-known name among violin manufacturers is Stradivarius, made by a guy named Antonio Stradivari, who lived from 1644 to 1737. Well done older copies of his work sell for thousands. Original Stradivarius violins literally sell for millions of dollars. We're talking like upwards of $16 million. These are well-made instruments, well-crafted, made of pine and maple. They're renowned for their powerful and rich tone. Some styles of music that show up at this time, and you'll notice I haven't bolded them because I'm not going to quiz you over them. There's the concerto, which is basically orchestra or some kind of accompaniment with a solo instrument, so it's not just singers anymore. There's the sonata, which is a multi-movement work, but that's going to change definition a little bit later on, which is why we're not going too deep into it. And then you've got the development of organ music. So let's go back to Germany for just a minute. Remember, Germany is heavily influenced by what religion? Right, Lutheranism. And so you've got music being written for Lutheran services. Now, Lutheran services, being Protestant, they're closer to Adventist services in some ways than a Catholic service. You don't have the same kind of liturgy, which is these formal things that you have to do each week. And music is used more for preludes and interludes, and of course congregational singing. It's not got the same function as it does in, say, Catholic or Anglican church services. So you got a couple composers that I want to mention. Johann Pachelbel. Most of you know Johann's Pachelbel da 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 da. You probably all have heard that. I'm not even going to bother with it. Look it up if you'd like to, but anyways, one of the early organ composers. But the other one I want to mention is Dietrich Buxtehude, who's a German Lutheran organist, and he wrote a lot of church music, preludes and whatnot. And the example I want you to listen to, at least the first part of it, is his Preludium in E major, Buxtehude Works, Volume 141. What I want you to listen for is how crazy fast the pedal part goes. Remember, with organ, you're playing not only with your two hands, but you're playing with your 2 feet as well. And I want you to listen to how dexterous this part is. This is going to be kind of toccata style. So it's going to sound kind of like he's improvising. It's going to be fancy, technical, lots of flourish. Take a listen to it, enjoy it, and then we'll see you again for the next lecture.